This week on the Destination Angler.
The most important thing was he didn't lift the tail out of the water. So the next thing I see, and the guide sitting, kneeling down in the well of the boat, the next thing I see is just the soles of his feet. This fish dragged him, pulled him clean out of the boat and hit the water, and we drifted off the flat quite so. So it wasn't super deep, maybe 8 feet or so. At first, there's just an explosion of foam and water and bubbles, and then the fish took him straight down. And for the first few seconds, I couldn't see anything because it was just literally, it had been foamed.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon.
Hey listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you're new to the show, be sure to hit that subscribe button to get all the new episodes on world-class destinations coming your way. Hey, and if you're a fan, be sure to tell your buddies and let them know about the show. And speaking of world-class, tune into our next episode as we hike into the backcountry of Yellowstone National Park to world-renowned Slough Creek. What makes Slough Creek so special is it's a high-altitude freestone cutthroat fishery in a wilderness setting that fishes like a spring creek. How about that? And then we head to Craig, Montana and the Mighty Mo, and after that, Central Oregon for some top-notch stillwater fishing. And be sure to backcast to catch our last episode on the Kootenai River in northwest Montana with Tim Linehan Outfitting. Tim does a great job showcasing one of the most underrated and uncrowded fisheries in the state and shares stories on upland bird hunting, close encounters with wildlife, and landing a once-in-a-lifetime 15-pound rainbow with a good client. And if you're active on social media, so are we. You can join in the conversation with the Destination Angler Connection on Facebook, and be sure to follow us on Instagram. And today our destination is Grand Bahama Island, and our guest is expert fly angler, author, and outfitter Greg Vincent of H2O Bonefishing. Grand Bahama Island is known for miles and miles of uncrowded and incredibly healthy flats fishing for some of the largest bonefish in the world. Here anglers can expect daily encounters with fish in the 6 to 8 pound class and realistic shots at double-digit bonefish. A little bit about Greg. He's been involved in destination fly angling for over 30 years for both fresh and saltwater species, which has taken him into places like Argentina, Costa Rica, the Cayman Islands, and Chile, where he's worked as a guide, manager, and owner-operator. He's appeared on many TV shows over the years and has authored several articles published in magazines like The Drake and other online publications. He's also written for Yellow Dog Fly Fishing and Orvis Travel. You'll find Greg featured on instructional videos from Orvis, and he's even featured in a movie called Location X from the Chasing Silver series and on the DVD movie Connect, where he did a segment on Cuba. Greg is an avid fly tyer with several patterns sold commercially the world over and is active in conservation projects on Grand Bahama. Currently, Greg is part owner in 2 fishing programs in Chile and in southern Patagonia, and he's co-owner of H2O Bonefishing. And lucky for us, Greg is here to dial us in to the incredible bonefishing opportunities on Grand Bahama Island. Greg, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. I hope all's well.
Yeah, you are a busy guy with all these things that you've been up to. When do you find time to fish?
Well, when you live so close to the flat, Steve, it's pretty much any time you want to. I'm very fortunate for that. So I can probably jump in my truck or get in a flats boat, and 20 minutes later I'm on a flat to myself. So I can go anytime I like. In reality, as horrible as that may sound to some, or as frustrating as that may sound to some, that's the truth. So I do get the chance to fish, quite often.
Good for you. I'm jealous. It sounds wonderful. All right, so let me ask you just from the get-go here, for those folks that maybe haven't been bone fishing, what is the allure of bone fishing?
That's a good question. But, where do you begin? Well, first, you read a lot and see a lot, and they do carry, quite a reputation with regards to their ability to run, and to strip line off a reel. So, of course, there's always that as the attraction. But the process, I think, itself is worthy of note, because the whole way you have to lead into these fish, and it's as much about hunting as it is fishing. So, to go out, actually hunt them down, find them, determine how they're feeding and so on, and then make the presentation. And then you get the hookup, and then you get that run. So it's a complete sort of visual process. And I think that's really certainly once you've done it, That's what sort of jumps back at you. It's like that. It's a full, complete set of requirements, and it's a mixture of all of them. Like I said, the sort of headliner really is their speed and their power, but it's the whole process that goes into getting to that point. I think that really does have people coming, back for more and more. That's probably the most appealing part of it.
Oh, that's interesting. I remember you were telling me before the show that you feel like you're still a student of bone fishing.
Yes, I do. And I think obviously it's probably not productive as an angler to think you know it all. Forget about the sort of, the possible arrogance of it to think you know everything. But I think I always go into every fishing day, with an open mind. And of course, there is, you do, your learning curve does begin to flatten, but it does not ever go completely flat. So your experience and the more you do it, the more information that you gather, personally. But it's always an upward curve, and it'll, in my opinion, will always remain an upward curve.
Sounds like it could take you a lifetime, and maybe you might never master it, but always be learning new things.
Yes, keep your mind open. There's always something to learn, and if your mind is open, then you're going to find those additional bits of information much quicker than if you start closing your mind and thinking that you know it all.
Yeah. Okay, so Grand Bahama Island, where you're located, this area is known for having some of the largest bonefish in the world, and you've actually studied that, correct?
Well, we've been fortunate to be involved with one particular project, which has been the telemetry tagging of bonefish with the Fishery Conservation Foundation that was being run through by a name of David Phillip, and he through the University of Illinois. So we have been out and tagging these fish and collecting them, by anglers, by netting, very well taken care of. So we've been involved in that now for probably about 7 or 8 years, something like that. And I think it's probably the most comprehensive telemetry tagging that's taken place for bonefish anywhere, really. I'm not quite sure of what's happened in the Keys, but I think most of it and a lot of it's done here on Grand Bahama.
Oh, that's cool. So you can actually, you're tracking fish and you guys get them, you weigh them eventually? You catch them and weigh them?
Yeah, each fish is caught and then you weigh, the measurements are taken, length, girth, and the weight of the fish. And then a small, I think they call them transponders, is inserted into the stomach cavity of the fish. And that sends out a signal then. Then we had up to 57 different receivers that are placed then all around the island.
And so why do you suppose Grand Bahama Island grows such large bonefish? The double-digit class bonefish, it sounds like something that is a realistic opportunity for anglers coming there.
It is, and to answer the question, really don't know. But it's not as if, that you're only going to catch, 10-pound, 8, 10-plus pound bonefish in Grand Bahama. Andros still has very big fish as well, as does Abaco, certain parts of Abaco, and other islands too. The whole chain, you always have a chance of it. I think probably with our fishery, something that's, not necessarily different, but quite possibly it is different in so much as the diversity of the flats. And we have, a fair amount of grass flats and dark bottom marl, hard marl, soft marl, mud, and things like that. And whether that plays a factor in it or not, we just don't know, because you can go to not too far away to some other areas, and the fishery is different in so much as you find a lot of schools of fish. While there's always a chance you can have a big fish, where there's little fish, there's big fish. But proportionally, as you come to our part on the north, this part of Grand Bahama, they for some reason become more single in their movements, small groups and things like that. Because bonefish in general, as they mature, they become more solitary.
Okay.
So when they're in the large schools, they're generally the smaller size fish, and as they mature then, because they mature very slowly, which is a lot of people don't quite realize that. So, for example, and then a comparison, for example, the fish in the Keys, they grow 2 to 3 times quicker than they do over here in the Bahamas.
Oh, why is that?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't answer that question, but they do. It's a proven fact. Now, so a 10-pound bonefish, for example, on Grand Bahama is going to be 20 plus years old.
Oh, wow.
So that's 20 years or minus a year while he's growing up or she's growing up, because the big ones are all females. So while they develop over that 19 years, taking the first year as their development stage, they're being hounded by, barracudas and sharks and ospreys and all that kind of stuff. So, a fish that's been on the flats, avoiding all these things are pretty smart. So they come out of they develop into a very sort of smart, educated fish. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with fishing pressure. That's what their awareness is what got them to be that size anyway, these big females. So it's quite interesting, in their development, because they have a unique way of developing too, is that they spawn out in the ocean. So while they're creatures that live, eat, survive in the shallows, when it comes time to spawn, they go out into the ocean, and they go in these mass aggregations, and they sink down, I think, to on average 160, 180 feet in several thousand feet of water off the drop. And they do this mass spawn, and then the fertilized eggs, like most, they at the whims of the winds and the currents and the tides, and they go where those elements take them. And then they actually turn into it's like a small eel-like larvae. It's about 6 centimeters long. And it's almost like, you get a 3-year-old has a runny nose and he has that bit of, 2 inches of snot hanging from it. It looks just like that, with a little silver eye and a black dot in the middle. Yeah, that's what it looks like. And then it continues on its, at the whim of the elements, and it ends up in the shallows and develops into a juvenile, of the fish. It actually shrinks, it becomes smaller, and it shrinks then and morphs into the juvenile of the species. There's only 3 species that do it, actually. It's the bonefish, the ladyfish, and the tarpon, and it's called leptocephalus, and it's a unique sort of development stage. So they're actually, spawn in the ocean and end up in the shallows via becoming an eel along the way. So very interesting development of the fish itself,
I'll say.
So it's interesting then too, is where do they, for example, because they're at the whims of the tides and the currents, the ability for a fishery to rebound after loss of overfishing or whatever the reasons are, or water quality. The replenishment of a fishery might not necessarily have anything to do with the fishery itself and its redevelopment. So while there's nothing proven that I'm aware of, who knows? For example, maybe the Florida Keys and Key West is more reliant on the bonefish spawning in Cuba, and they come across the larvae and come across in the Gulf Stream, or maybe something in Mexico to come up north or south or whatever the whims of the currents are. They don't know that yet that I'm aware of, but it's an interesting way to think about it, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that a bonefish spawned off Grand Bahama, for example, is always going to create a juvenile fish of Grand Bahama. It could be Abaco, or it could be, the Berry Islands or Eleuthera or whomever, or the other way. The current on the ocean side here comes sort of east to west, so maybe they come on that, and ours come from somewhere else. But so it's interesting. They're a fascinating fish. They really are.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm curious. Can you describe, how a 10-pound bonefish fights? Like, what's that like when you get that thing on the end of your line?
It's pretty impressive, and your rod. When you set the hook in the fish and the fish takes off, you just feel that weight, and then the speed. And the rod goes down and stays down. So it might take X amount of yards off you, but the rod never bucks. It buckles over and stays over, and it'll take 100 yards or so. Depends on your tippet and all that sort of stuff, and where they are, whether they have an open run or So they will take a lot of line off you, but it's a very powerful. You can just really feel it. There's no sort of after 20 yards you feel it sort of lessen, or a sort of the rod tip will buck a little bit or something like that. There's just no give in them. They just go,
Yeah. Is it like a big first run and then like a bunch of smaller runs, or?
Mostly. Sometimes, depending on, if they have the open water to run, they generally go in a fairly straight line, but they may, if they sort of turn, if the environment, like let's say there's mangroves or something they don't want to go in or do want to go in, and that can obviously alter what they may do. And often they'll run,
right,
and then when they stop, they run straight back at you. So, for example, you'll have anglers come. Like, I'm right-handed, for example, but I cast with the right hand, and then when I hook a fish, I switch it over to my left, and I reel with my right hand.
Okay.
Because more often than not, and anglers can do it, and just as an experiment, and it's quite interesting. If you simulated, put your two hands together and simulated that sort of small arc rotation of a fly reel, and did you put your two hands together and did it, you'll find that you'll lose coordination in your non-dominant hand quite quickly. So, when these fish come back at you and you really need to crank on them to keep the line tight, you're better off with your dominant hand.
I see. What weight rods are you typically using?
Well, here it's 8 weights is the most common. And if you go one either side of it, is still okay. The 9 weight also is a popular one because our fish are generally a little bit bigger than some areas. And occasionally you'll have a 7 weight and even occasionally a 6 weight. But you really want to make sure you have a good drag. That it's not like, you're at a disadvantage to have a 7 weight.
Okay.
But it's really the reel as much as anything. You want to get these fish in quick. The quicker you get them in, the better off it is for the fish. They don't get predated on as much, So it's sharks will find them a lot of the time if you have these long, drawn out battles with them. So we like to use a heavier tippet and get them in as quickly as you can.
So you've had sharks pick off your fish in the middle of a fight?
Yeah, it'll happen. Yes.
That's too bad.
Occasionally a barracuda, very, very occasionally, but more often than not, here it's the sharks, small juvenile lemons and reef sharks and occasional bull sharks and black tips. They're never really big for the most part. They're 2.5 to 3.5 feet, but they're easily enough to take the tail off or just bite one in half, depending on exactly how big they are.
Oh man. Well, tell us more about Grand Bahama. Give us an idea of the fishery. Obviously, without giving away your secret spots, but just a little bit so people understand the fishery.
Yeah, it's a very interesting fishery because it like I was mentioning earlier, it has a lot of different types of bottom structure, and where some fisheries mostly sand, for example, in some areas it's a very consistent way to fish. And the fish are in the similar water the whole time. So how you spot them and, is no different in one area than it is from another. Here, it's different on some of our parts of our fishery and probably the majority of fishery because of that variety. So you can have a mottled bottom, that varies between, say, a dark olive green and even browns, and then interspersed with gaps of sort of yellowy sand. And then a fish, then on a lot of those areas, the fish will take on the hue of the bottom. So a lot of the fish here that you see are really dark, and that's how you see them. And you'd think they'd be difficult to see, which they are at times, but jet black on light brown still sticks out a mile if you have the sunlight. So they can, be easy to spot, sometimes even depending on the height of the sun and things like that. Are easier to see at times on that dark bottom than they are on a white sand bottom, where you're probably looking for shadows as much as anything else. So it's fairly unique, the fishery here overall, because of it. So you can fish one flat, and then half an hour later, 20 minutes later, whatever it is, you can go to a different flat only 400 yards away that is totally different color, different makeup.
Huh.
And that's the uniqueness of it, probably the most unique aspect of our particular fishery compared to a lot of the other fisheries in the Bahamas.
Right. And you've got, hundreds of miles of flats fishing there, don't you?
Well, it's the island as a coastline. If you took the sort of coastline, around, the island's sort of shaped like a shoe. So if you went down the back of the heel to the bottom of the heel and then went all the way to the toe, it's probably, and then up and around, and then the Keys to the eastern end of the island. It's probably about 100 miles, of shoreline, shall we say. It's significantly more than that. But if you were to take straight lines along the shoreline, but actually, I think in a straight line from the west end to the east end, I think it's something like 65 miles or 75 miles, something like that, in a straight line.
That's plenty.
But it's lots of water,
Yeah.
And it's not like it's heavily pressured, so there's enough water to go around, yeah.
Could I be, in a typical day of fishing, would I typically encounter a couple other anglers or sometimes not?
Well, we're sort of fortunate in how the bonefishing outfits are positioned here. This wasn't by design. It just turned out that way, is that there's about 20 or 30 miles. There's sort of 3 or 4 main areas of the island if you break it all down, and we're all about 20 to 30 miles apart. So that's sort of, there's a little bit of overlap, but for the day-to-day vast majority of our fishing, there's no, we don't run into a lot of other boats other than our own.
Nobody around.
Yeah.
How nice is that?
Very good. Yeah. Don't say anything.
Yeah, right. It's our secret. Mum's the word.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but you also chase some other fish like, permit, and you do some offshore fishing so people can come and kind of mix it up too when they come to you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We're primarily a bonefish fishery. That's what we tout. That's how we're sort of known. However, we do have, enough permit to interest our anglers. And then in the summer months, we do have a few tarpon, but probably so that the big three, shall we say, are here, but in their order of not so much popularity, but their population sizes, then it probably goes, bonefish, permit, tarpon. So you've got a chance. And then the tarpon's significantly shorter window, which is basically sort of May to September sort of time. But the permit can be here at any time, along with the bones. It's a proper year-round fishery when it comes to bonefish, in particular. And then the cooler months are the months that have some real advantages for big fish, for big bonefish. But it's a time for the permit. Yeah, the permit don't particularly like the cold. So, probably take out December, January, February is the least. Now, if you have a couple of days of nice weather, settled weather, that the permit can come back in shallow, but they're a little less inclined to come in to the cooler water temperatures, and they actually go the other way. So you'll find that in the summer months that the bonefish are less comfortable in the warmer water, but the permit are okay. So it's definitely the permit like the medium to warmer temperatures, and the bonefish kind of prefer the cooler. So
okay.
It's a varied fishery. And then offshore, we target basically from the fish are here from probably late March into April, but our sort of our headliner is yellowfin tuna that we like to chase on fly, but also mahi-mahi, but we also have blackfin tuna and skipjack tuna as well. We like to promote really just sort of May and June as the primary months, because it's part of the season in so much as when anglers like to travel, and the winds are a little more cooperative at that time. So while the fishery is here, say in April, for example, April's a breezier month than May and June. So to try and book an offshore, fly fishing trip, there's going to be times you're not going to be able to go out. It's never going to stop you from flats fishing, because 20-mile-an-hour wind is not uncommon, but you can be on the flats in 20-mile-an-hour wind. You won't be able to go offshore in 20 miles an hour.
Interesting. What's a typical day with some decent anglers for bone fishing for you guys? Yeah,
well, we're not known, as a numbers fishery, and you just can't. If your fishery has a larger than average size population of bonefish, then that would suggest, or it means that there's a more mature sort of set of fish that you fish for. And as the species gets more solitary, as they develop, as a fishery itself and as a species, you don't have access to the schools. So generally, a lot of the numbers that you catch, are going to involve schools of fish. Now, it's not that we don't have schools of fish. Still to this day, the biggest school of bonefish I ever saw was on this island. But as an average, we don't have the 50 fish schools, 60 fish schools as much proportionally as many other locations. So for numbers are concerned, if you've got an experienced angler, there's no reason why you're not going to get. It's more to do with shots than it is anything else.
Right.
So if you've gone out, it's not uncommon to get 25 to 30 shots a day fish. How many of the anglers convert? It's a different story altogether.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say from saying, well, how many, what's the typical thing that'll happen. It's hard to gauge by the results, like how many fish you caught. We sort of gauge it as much as how many shots you get. So, slow days.
It's a good measure.
Yeah. Slow days is like 6 to 12, I would say. And then it just goes up from there. I mean, we've had anglers catch 30 fish in a day, but that's more of a rarity than it is anything else.
Once again, for maybe people that aren't super familiar with bone fishing, take us into the mind of a bonefish. What do they eat? How do they think? Where do they hang out? What are their behaviors?
Okay, yeah, they're primarily a shallow water fish. That's where they go to eat. And shallow, I mean, sometimes they are like they're in a puddle. Their back will be out of the water, their dorsal, their tail, everything. They'll go into really, really skinny water at times. But still, 2-3 feet still considered, shallow. So
yeah,
primarily they in there to feed. Their primary sort of food source is crustaceans, whether shrimp, crab, things like that, worms as well. And then from my understanding on some of the diet studies that takes place, their diet does change as they get older. So while when they're younger, they focus on those type food sources, but they also include then more fish as probably a higher protein per mouthful, so they target then other types of fish on the flats as well. So that's their primary diet, but they're sort of hunting then on the flats themselves. And then at the back of their throat, they have 2 plates, crushers. So they'll pop whatever they catch straight back to their crushers and, like a crab or something, and then they just grind it into a mulch and then they swallow it.
Okay.
They're on the hunt and that's what they're built to do. So their primary sort of defense mechanism then is, they just run, so when you're in that shallow water, you just instinctively bolt. So, that's why one of the reasons why they're so spooky, even out of the box. I mean, a shadow, for example, could signify an osprey coming down to get them, So a splash off to the side might indicate, a shark accelerating towards them. So they're very spooky, high-strung kind of fish, They're always wary. Like I said, even when they're, when you could go to some desert island in the middle of nowhere, that which I've been fortunate to do in places like Cuba, where I know that there's been no fly fishermen years and years ago. If you make a hard, cast next to them and, they're going to spook, that's what they're designed to do. So you got to place the fly as quietly as possible, but it's not always possible, obviously, but that's your sort of goal on each and every presentation. So they can be on the flats either in singles or small groups, and sometimes here, larger groups. And you can actually see trails of mud sometimes where they've just been feeding because they're bottom feeders. So they're rooting through the sand and the grass and the rock holes and, sucking out whatever they can, whether it's a worm or even a clam a lot of times it's actually shells. Like we'll have a bonefish get killed by a shark or something, and I'll open it up, and there's more often than not, there's some sort of evidence of shells, whether it's like a clam type shell so they hoover up a lot of stuff, and they're interesting in that way. But and then the tail sometimes will pop up, and sometimes they'll be on their snout, digging something out, especially in a soft area or maybe a rocky area. Like if a crab's gone in a hole or something that they want, a minnow or a shrimp or something, and you can actually tell. Sometimes you tell when a fish, how long a fish has been on a particular bottom, because sometimes you'll catch a fish on a rocky bottom, for example, and it's like it's got lipstick on it. It's like it's just put lipstick because its lips are red, and what that is because of the rocks, they're in there digging, and it breaks the little capillaries. Right, so it's actually it's like pink, So they got like they got lipstick on. It's quite comical. So they're interesting. That's basically how they feed. They get their snouts above, and they're bottom feeders, right? So they're geared to go down onto what it is they're going to eat. They're actually quite funny. Sometimes what we'll have here, and it's not only to here. It doesn't only happen here, but it does happen here probably more than anywhere else. So certainly I've seen is that. Sometimes you'll have, especially on an outgoing tide, on a windy outgoing day, you'll have crabs get blown off the mangroves, and they then, it's too much wind and current for them to scuttle back to wherever they go. So they scuttle along, and because it's windy, there's mangrove leaves, so they get up on top of the mangrove leaf. And under those certain circumstances, you will actually see bonefish, and there's some areas we can go to here. With the right conditions, you can find it with some regularity. And what the bonefish will do is actually come up underneath, and with their snouts, they'll knock over the leaf to eat the crab.
Really?
Yeah, which is quite unique to hear. But they're actually quite comical to look at because their mouth's sort of underneath. So when they come and take something off the top, they just look so clumsy. It's almost like they're cross-eyed. They're sort of weird-looking, comical-looking. It's almost like a clown, but it's unique. So while there's those exceptions like that, mostly they're up on the flats and they're feeding for the dinner, for the lunch, breakfast, or whatever.
Neat.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Greg, well, take us through your process for, the end-to-end. So sighting, casting, hooking, fighting, landing a bonefish. Like what are the things that anglers need to be aware of and thinking about at each of those steps?
Right. Well, probably one of the first things, if we sort of imagine it as a sequence of what's likely to happen. So the first thing really is line management. You'll be amazed how often that catches anglers out, because maybe you've gone 10 minutes without seeing a fish, half an hour if it's slow or whatever, and you think your line's all organized. However, it's not. So one thing is, you go to finally get a cast and then it's wrapped around the cooler or something. I don't know, whatever. You put something down on it.
Oh, geez.
So the first thing is line management. Always be aware of it, the way your line is. And of course, when you're flats fishing, you get up on the bow. What you want to do is strip off the amount of line that's your maximum cast. You don't need any more than that. And then cast that line out and then strip it back. And so the coils then are going to be laid they're going to be laid in the order that you're going to want the line to come out, right? So if you just strip it from your reel and dump it on the ground, then the first bit of line you need is the bottom of the pile. That then leads to tangles.
I see.
So, the first thing is to get up your line management, cast out, strip it in, put it in a neat pile, and then be checking on it every so often. Just glance back and make sure it's working, it's all clear and everything like that, contained exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd say that's probably, one of the first things that you want to get into a good habit of checking. And then I'm basing this now on when you're being on a flats boat. So, then you've got to start thinking, well, what can I do as an angler that's going to increase my chances? So, one of the things is, for example, you get the call from the guide, 60 feet, 10 o'clock, or whatever the call is. It's a good habit to get into is you've got the fly in your hand. That's the sort of get ready position. So you've got your fly in your hand and a few feet of fly line and leader out. The more, the better. But you always want to keep within that line management. Sort of, you want to keep it managed. So when you get the call from the guide, go ahead and point your rod. Just point your rod where you think that is, because the guide's 10 o'clock, 60 feet might not be exactly where you're looking. So by pointing the rod where you think that is, now the guide, because remember the guide's behind you, so he can't see where you're looking. So you showing him where you are actually looking is really important information, and then he can guide you from there. So in general, as an angler, your chances of being successful are much, much higher when you actually have a target. While it's not always necessary, because you can be talked into it. It's like start casting, left a bit, right a bit, right a bit, left, put it down, shoot it, whatever those instructions come on a blind cast. Proportionally, you're going to be much, much better off, having success when you see the fish. So showing the guide where you're looking really is a massive benefit. And then don't get in the habit of, then also a little trick is when you hear the call, try and listen to the distance as well, because obviously if that determines the distance determines how much speed you need to cast, or how much time you have or not have in that case.
Okay.
So your urgency level then will come from the distance. So, if the guide says, 100 feet, then 100 feet, you've got time. If the guide says 30 feet, you've got significantly less time, right? So one thing to do is to not automatically let go of your fly and start to cast, which is a bad habit some anglers have, because you may have a lot more time than you think. And the trouble is then once everything starts in motion, there's too much going on, right? So now if your fly's over the side and you're starting to cast and you're, say, 11 o'clock when the fish is at 9 o'clock, now you're already out of whack. You can't, you've got to start making that turn and things start to go wrong. So don't let go of the fly.
And everything's moving, right?
Yeah, you're moving towards the fish, or fish is moving towards you, or whatever it is. It's generally a closing window of opportunity. So the most time you have is, for the most part, not always, but from the moment that you spot the fish, generally everything becomes less and less. You have less and less time from that moment onwards.
Right. Well, Greg, why do you have more time with a longer cast than a shorter cast? Did I hear that right?
No. There's more distance. So if you see the fish at 100 feet, you're going to have more time to locate that fish and prepare for the cast for that fish.
Okay.
Because you're not going to cast 100 feet. Very, very few people can actually do that. And if the fish is coming at you, which a lot of times it is, there's no point. And that's actually bringing me to my next point, which is to stay within your comfort zone. Because a lot of the times you can get closer to the fish. So again, it's why you don't let your fly go, because if the fish is at 80 feet and your cast is 40 feet that you're comfortable with and you can catch a lot of fish, now you've got to wait. Everything's in motion.
I see.
Yeah, so now you've got to keep the fly in motion. The fish may turn and the guide may have to go left and right. And, there's time. That the longer the time interval between when you let the fly go and when you present the fly, nothing good comes of that generally. Yeah, because there's too much going on, right? You're going to tangle or you have to put it down and, then you lift up, you make a noise. And there's all sort of, most of the things associated with that is negative, right? So stay within the distance you like to cast and, again, point where the fish is. Now, sometimes you've got no choice. It's get rid of the fly right now. If a fish, let's say you've got a cloud going over and the sun comes out and there's a fish 20 feet away, well, you've just got to throw it out there. There's no time to explain and, in that moment. So, again, point the rod to help the guide, show the guide where you're actually looking so you can be talked into it. And then once you spot, again, it's a very common mistake. Once you spot the fish, don't take your eyes off it, right? What normally happens is you'll get, what normally, but fairly common is that the guide will spot the fish. You've pointed your rod, there it is, now you see it. Then the angler then says, right, okay, well, what's my line doing,
Yeah.
No, now you've taken your eyes off the target to go look at your line, and then when you come up, it's not there again. Guide can see it, but you've lost it now because the boat's moving and, it may have speeded up or whatever the reasons are. Now you could start the whole process again, right? So once you lock on, that's why you want to have your line management sorted out before. So your line needs to be checked every so often so you don't have to check it once you see a fish.
So you're working in partnership with your guide. Your guide's telling you where the fish is, but you, as an angler, you want to see that fish. You don't want to just be blind casting based on what the guide's saying. You want to spot that thing.
You want to spot it. Your success rate is going to be much higher if you actually are casting at something rather than listening to his instruction, because there's never any confidence in that. It's like left a bit, well, how much is left? Right a bit, or should I go more? Once questions are built into the process and guessing starts to start place, then there's no, you start to lose the plot, so to speak. So always better to see the target. And then the other one is really to slow down. For those that have done it for the first time, it's probably the single most unusual thing that happens is that people aren't ready for how much more hurried it is. So if you have, if you're a trout fisherman, for example, there's, you go into see a rising trout there in a riffle or whatever, in a seam or whatever it is. And, as long as you don't start throwing rocks in there, that fish is going to stay there. You can go and, whatever, have a beer and chill out for a few minutes and then come back and it's still there. Well, that doesn't apply in this game. So what happens is it's going to feel so much more hurried. Everything's going to feel so much more hurried. And of course, what that leads to then is anglers speed up. And of course, it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't let that back cast straighten out behind you, you're never going to get a good cast.
Right.
And you'll be amazed how many anglers actually, they're frustrated because they'll say things like, well, I normally cast so much better than this. But what's happened is that the psyche now has changed. Their psyche is now hurried. So their back cast doesn't straighten up behind them. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you do, without a decent back cast, you're never going to get a good forward cast anyway. So it's to slow down. Don't get caught up in the moment. You've got to try and bring your heart level down and let that fly line straighten out behind you. And that's a common sort of mistake that people make, and it's a natural one. You're kind of drawn into it just because of the process that's often involved with fishing, especially if a fish suddenly shows up.
Yeah.
You've got no choice but to get there quick. And remember, the guide is giving instruction, and everything about that. It's real instruction. Just listen to it. If you want to surmise it, or if you want to to understand it more, play it back after, not during. Just go with what the guide says, because he's there giving you instruction to catch that fish. He's giving you no other reason other than to catch that fish. So don't make sense of it in the moment. If you don't understand it, approach it after the fact. and then have a discussion with it over a beer or later.
Yeah. And those guides are giving it to you rapid fire too, right? Strip, 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 stop, strip, 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 that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also the misconception there too is, and you sort of worded it, and led me into the next one perfectly, is that fast, rapid instruction when fishing from a flat boat, a lot of that part of the instruction is not necessarily anything to do with animating the fly. And that's always the assumption. So when you hear strip, 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 right, you think, a lot of anglers think, well, you want the fly, it's natural assumption, you want the fly to be going faster. But in truth, what's actually happening is, when you do thousands and thousands of hours on the water, is a guide knows exactly how much slack you have in your line. You probably not even aware of it, right? So what's actually happening is that strip, strip, strip is to take the slack out of your line. It's not to animate the fly, right?
Yeah.
So, and that again can confuse anglers, because the very next cast, for example, the angler's stripping like a lunatic, but like he did on the cast before, but this time the fly's turned over perfectly. He doesn't need to do that. You don't have time in the moment to, especially from a flats boat, because once you're drifting towards the fish, you're creating slack. So anything that prevents or slows down the process of getting slack out is not an option for you. You can't, as a guide, say, hey, George, this time I'm saying strip, strip, strip really fast because I actually want you to take out the slack that you have in your, it's just over. It's over before it even starts. So that strip, 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 and you'll have all sorts of requests that aren't going to make sense, like strip, 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 stop. What's that supposed to mean? Strip, 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 stop. You just told me to strip 6 times rapidly. Why do I need to stop? What that means now is you've caught up with your line, and now the fly's moving too quick. Stop it. But again, so these are the things, the little nuances that you've got to. So again, if you literally take the guide's instruction to the T every single time, do exactly as he says, you're going to learn quicker too, because you'll pick up these little nuances. Or again, you can, once that opportunity, either you're successful or not, you can have the discussion about that cast after, But if you question it and think, well, why am I doing this? And of course, it's too late. So it's that whole hurried process. Yeah, catches a lot of people, off guard. So that's one thing to be ready for. Is that much faster process of everything.
Sure. So in the morning, when you pick up your client and you're driving them to, the landing, wherever you're going to fish, what's the conversation? You say things like, it's going to sound like I'm going to be yelling at you today, but really I'm not. Exactly.
Yeah. You're never being yelled at. It's just that the urgency has to be built in. If urgency is required, it's naturally built in the instruction. So
I get you.
You can't tell somebody to really hurry up without telling them to really hurry up. It's, you kind of defeat the purpose if you spend a long time to try to tell somebody how to hurry up,
Yeah,
so
right.
It's not that the guy's pissed off at you or anything. It's just that it needs to be done. And then there's on to the next sort of stage is that I have a sort of fairly well-known saying now. It says, do not have a stronger desire to not spook the fish than to catch it. So what happens is that built in, I don't want to spook the fish. And that's their priority, not to spook the fish. That's a slippery slope there, because what that can lead to then is that desire to not spook it is actually a much more, the desire than to catch it. You're going to put the fly too far away from the fish a lot of the time. So if you let's say you've got a fish in a foot of water, while casting 10, 15 feet away from it, but in its line is not going to spook it, that time interval between when you've cast it, when he gets there, is probably going to 9 times out of 10, they don't go in a straight line. It's not going to be in the right place.
I see.
Yeah. So don't get caught up so much into trying to not spook it. Ultimately, you need to, if it's spook it, it's over with, but
it is. Okay.
Try to look at it. Now, if you've got a fish in real skinny, he's not like, it's crawling along its back. You're going to have to put that fly close to it. You've got no choice. Yeah. And you'll be amazed how many fishermen don't want to do that. They just want to keep leading it 6 feet, 8 feet, 6 feet, 5 feet, to not spook it. And before you know, the opportunity's gone and the fish has just either seen the boat or it's sailed on by, without actually ever seeing the fly. So I like to work from what I call inside out, which is And bonefish, they're like any other fish. There's days when they can be significantly more active, and well, let's just call it more cooperative to the fishermen than other days. So I like to try and find that out from the beginning. So I like to fish inside out, which means I like to cast 2 or 3 feet away from the fish to begin with. And if I get away with that, if that works for me, that's what I continue with, rather than outside in, which is, have to burn up X amount of fish. You're 15 feet away, and then you're 12 feet away, and then you're 10, then you're 8, and now you've burned up half the day. And finally, after lunch, you got to cast 2 or 3 feet away from them, and they're going to eat it. So
okay.
There's variables. This isn't set in stone. These are just generalizations that I'm talking about. But don't get caught up, basically, in casting too far ahead of the fish so the fish doesn't see the fly. And then, again, from a fishing perspective, once you've made the cast and the fish sees the fly, remember, when you're in a boat in particular, again, we touched on it a little earlier, is you get lots of slack. So setting the hook can be difficult sometimes, because with a slack line, you can never set the hook. So what happens then is that people can get caught up with wanting to feel every single fish. Now, you're not going to feel every single fish. In fact, if you wait to feel every single fish when you're fishing from a skiff, you're going to miss more than you'll catch, right? So what you want to do is, again, if you see the fish, and that's another added reason why you really want to see the fish, not just to make your presentation, but what the fish does after. So let's say you've got, 2 fish and you've thrown the fly out and the fish charges your fly. Now, you have to then let the fish get to your fly, and the fish then is going to stop, right? And there's only going to be 2 reasons why that fish stops, right? One is to eat your fly, and the other one is to refuse it. So if you always set the hook, regardless of what the fish has done or you think it's done, when that fish stops, make a long pull, long strip strike, and set the hook. Because, like I said, there's only 2 reasons. One, he's got it. He's eaten the fly, okay? So if you assume that when he stops, you strip strike, well, you've got him. The other one, if he refuses it, well, he's refused it, right? But what happens then is he stopped to refuse it. Then you've assumed that he's got it, so you make a long strip strike. You reanimate the fly quickly, and then you can drag out that sort of feeding mode in him, and he'll come and eat it. So you can actually turn a refusal into a very positive take. So there's no downside to assuming.
It won't spook him then.
Yeah. There's no downside to assuming that when he stops, make a long strip strike and set the hook. That's going to work out for you better. So you're actually setting it with your eyes, not by feel.
I see. And do you find that, do you get some trout anglers who come out there for the first time, and do they struggle with strip setting? They want to lift the rod tip instead? Yeah,
it's very common. I think that's what they call it in the industry, is trout set. At best, sometimes the fish will run, 20 yards and whatever, and then it'll turn and invariably comes out. It's bizarre. You could even try and set the hook on it like it's a tarpon. It's bizarre how often it comes out. So it's very, very rare if you trout set. And it's instinctive. It's totally instinctive. It's something that you're going to do. You want to try and not do it as quickly as you can, but don't be worried too much when you do it, because it's part of that is that you're instinctively doing it. You have no choice. Your muscle memory and your instincts kick in. So, but try and break that habit as best you can. And it doesn't hurt to practice. If you're going on your first saltwater trip, is if you wanted to put some time in, and again, I can't emphasize this enough with regards to first timers. If you want to put time in casting and doing these little things like this that I'm talking about, it'll work out for you much, much better.
Yeah. Practice.
Yeah. So the strip strike sets the hook. It actually pops the hook where it needs to go. The hard part then is to let the fish go, but it's 2 distinct motions. It's the hook set, let the fish go. Whereas a lot of time anglers will try and meld the 2 together. So it's like, oh, there he is, I'll let him go. That's not good enough. So it's still better than a trout set, but you do want to have some pressure on that. You do want it to come, and that's what does it. That long straight line to the fish. Yeah. So there's no give in the rod. What happens when you trout set is that hook's position, but when you lift the rod, there's no strength to set the hook in there, to pop the hook home.
It's not going to drive it in there.
It just, nothing to drive it in. It just sort of rests there till the fish turns and then it comes out. So set the hook, pop it in, then let the fish run.
Good stuff.
There's 2 distinct motions, but they got to happen very quickly, one after the other.
Well, Greg, let's get into your story a little bit. So here you are, an outfitter on Grand Bahama. How did that happen?
Yeah, it happened, coming 20 years ago now. Actually, over 20 years is when it first happened. And there used to be a business here called Pelican Bay Bonefishing. They hired me. They just started the program the year before, I believe it was. And in 1998 or 99, they wanted to get the program really going. So I guess they made some inquiries and my name popped up. And then they hired me then as a consultant, which I came then while in between my guiding duties at the time. So I would leave, for example, Argentina. I used to guide at the time then. The closest sort of open time I had, based on the season here was when I would finish. I used to guide down at Tierra del Fuego, so in Argentina. So when that season finished in April, then I would come here, for example, and then I would spend 6 to 8 weeks at a time over the next 2 years as a consultant to give my input and help train guides and redevelop the program. And then after just shy of 2 years, the owners of the program then asked if I would come full time. So they hired me then as a full time, which then I built the program then over about 4 or 5 years or so. And then in 2005, myself and my business partner, Jason Franklin, we teamed up and we bought out the fishing program from Pelican Bay Hotel. I was integrated into the hotel, the same business, when it was sold. So we extracted the business that I had been managing and then we rebranded it to H2O Bonefishing, and we've been doing it ever since. That was about 15 years ago.
Good for you. And how did you first get into fly fishing? Because I can tell by your accent, you're not from around here.
No, I'm not. Originally from, I was born in Wales. I'm a Welshman, but
okay.
I was very fortunate because while I have memory of my uncle Clive, fly fishing in Wales, in Ynysybwl, where I was born. My parents moved away when I was very young. In fact, my sister was born in Zambia. So my father's a mining engineer. They moved to Southern Africa when I was very young. There was times I was in boarding school. So back in the UK, they moved then to the Caribbean, but still boarding school from about the age of 10. So I used to go and then stay at times with my uncle and my aunt Trucy. And the very first time I ever saw anyone fly fishing was my uncle Clive. Now, I didn't fly fish. I was probably 10 or so. And he would set me up with a spinning rod and a worm. And so that's the first time I actually saw it. And in fact, I somewhat recently confessed to him that there was a day that, having watched my uncle, I actually went into his shed where he kept his creel and his fly rod and what have you. And I had this spinning rod. Of course, I knew nothing about it other than had seen him do it. But I remember he had this fishing bag, and in the fishing bag was a box of flies. So I went in and actually took, without his permission, I took my spinning rod, but I took the box of flies, and I can remember it vividly now still. And I went down to the local, one of the areas that he'd shown me. In fact, I even remember the name. It's called the Horse Pool. And it's a sort of very granity area, and there's these channels that come through there. And I tied the dry fly, which is like a black gnat, onto the end of the spinning line, monofilament, probably 8-pound test or 6-pound test or something like that. I wasn't sure. And then I tried to mimic him, even though he wasn't there. I had watched him, and I tried to mimic him. And of course, I was flailing and flailing and flailing. And eventually, then I got, was trying to get the knack of it, so to speak. And the fly hit the water on this one particular time, and I'll never forget. It's right on this granite ledge, and this trout came up and grabbed the dry fly.
Oh my gosh! What a gift!
I didn't hook it or anything, but I still remember it to this day. It was so that was my first attempt at fly fishing, which wasn't really fly fishing. It was just an adaptation that I tried to create, having watched my uncle. But as far as so as far as actually being taught fly fishing, I was then very fortunate that when I moved to the Cayman Islands, which I followed my parents to, I'm a land surveyor originally, and my father went to work back in the Caribbean. I'd grown up, in the Caribbean, different islands, Antigua, Anguilla, Tortola. So my father moved back to the islands, to the Cayman Islands. In fact, when I was about 22 or so, 21, I think. I can't remember exactly, so long ago now. And then I was actually working then as a land surveyor alongside my father. And there was an advertisement for a fishing guide. I'd always fished since I was young, even in Africa and other parts of the Caribbean. Not fly fished, but, deep sea fishing, trolling, spear fishing and all that sort of stuff. So having grown up in the Caribbean, it's all very familiar to me, except for fly fishing. But anyway, there's an advertisement wanting a local advertisement in a local newspaper advertising for the position of a fishing guide. And I remember my mother sort of persuading me, and it took her several attempts, and she kept sort of prodding me. And she goes, "Why don't you apply for that job?" So eventually, I called them, and they said, and they flew me over to the island of Little Cayman. I was living on Grand Cayman then, so I went over, and there was the manager of the lodge there, Mike Emanuel, who's passed on now, but Mike and Donna, and there was several guides there from out west. And cut a long story short is that I got introduced to them, so it took me under their wing. 3 of them. The main principal one was Bucky Buckenroth from Jackson Hole in Wyoming. And then there was Bill Happersett, also from Jackson Hole. And then there was Dr. Squidley, we call it, Dennis Edenson from Calgary in Alberta. So they had 3 seasonal fly fishing guides there. And I was very fortunate because I was, like I said, they sort of went under their wing, especially Bucky. And he was a full-on professional fly fishing guide. And I was fortunate in so much as I learned the profession as quickly as I did how to fly fish.
Yeah.
So I had a fantastic opportunity and teachers that taught me the profession itself and then also how to fly fish. So I didn't really start fly fishing until I became a fly fishing guide. Now, I was fortunate because of my background. I was very, very quick at picking it up. So within less than a year, I was, doing quite well, if I say so myself. So it was a very quick advancement for me personally, but I owe a sort of debt of gratitude to those 3 and Bucky Buckenroth in particular, who guided me through those early years or so.
Sounds like you had some people that believed in you, but I'm curious, does Uncle Clive know you swiped his flies? You ever fess up?
Yeah, I did. Quite recently, actually. When I say recently, it's probably about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a big family reunion. Actually, I'd come back from the Bahamas and we had Mum and Dad's place. We had a big barbecue and all the family came and we had a good old jolly. And unfortunately, the next day was Hurricane Matthew, one of the hurricanes. I don't remember. So I had to jump on a plane and come back. But it was at that reunion where I was sitting down and had a couple of beers in me, and I confessed my sins to my uncle. He had a good laugh about it.
And he's got to be pretty excited, or maybe even proud of you, where you've come with this.
Yes, well, he'd remembered those times, but it wasn't a topic that we're talking going back to when I was 10, so it's over 40 years ago, So there's not sort of those recollections needed reminding of, but he did remember the days I used to go out with him and fly fish. Well, he would fly fish, like I said.
Yeah. And speaking of beer, I hear you've got a pretty cool bar restaurant there at H2O Bonefishing. A place called Bones. Do I have that right?
Yes, we call it our clubhouse. It's owned by Jason, though. I don't have any involvement in its ownership anymore. But yes, it's called Bones Bar, and it's a fantastic place. And it just melds. It started actually, based. You'll see the logo is similar to our logo, and it's with H2O, and it's that's how it started. Was we were the piece that we felt we were missing was the fact that we didn't really have a place of our own to call our own. While we had decent service and a great relationship with one of the local bars here. In fact, 2 of them, all within about 100 yards of each other, maybe less. It wasn't under our sort of, our ownership, so to speak. So that's sort of how it started, and it grew into what it is today, which is a very popular local bar. So while it still has a very, very close relationship with H2O, it's still open to the public. It's still, still a fishing based. You can see it, and it's
sure.
So it's a very interesting place and adds a wonderful element to the fishing program.
That's great. And talk about your fishing program and the experience that you're offering at H2O Bonefishing.
Yes, well, it's a turnkey. That's really what we pride ourselves in. It's while it's a little unconventional. It's not a lodge as such. It's not a contained, one building lodge. with the clubhouse, it's really the only difference between them is that we do on occasion provide like a meals package, but there's so many different varied restaurants so close together that we don't do the sort of organized, evening meals. So other than that, it's really very much with the clubhouse, very much like a lodge. And we sort of, what we want to do is to take care of our customers from the moment they arrive to the moment they leave. So they always have access, to information, if they have any issues or, instruction, equipment and all that sort of stuff. So it's a self-contained unit that we want to promote ourselves under. And, we have a decent following of people that enjoy that, but also enjoy the little extra bit of freedom that they have.
Sure.
So the Bones and the clubhouse can provide the meeting place and the ability for camaraderie and groups to get together, but it also, the evening meals allows you the independence to either go out as a group or go out independently, so
okay,
that's quite popular with some because the lodge sort of environment for some is whether they come with their wives or whatever the reasons are, they have different eating habits, don't want to eat sort of family style. They rather eat more privately. So it has its benefits along the way as well, which is that independent slant to it. But even though you are independent, you're taken care of, like I said, from the moment you arrive until the moment you leave.
That's nice. And are your guides, so you use local people for guides,
yeah.
And are they taking,
all Bahamian, yeah.
I mean, is it like is it all day long that you're going, or is it like a little bit in the morning and then come back in the evening, or how's that work?
Yes. So our start time, we trailer and we go where we think, sometimes we go where the fishing the weather forces us to go, which in itself is, that may sound a little rough, but it's actually very, very beneficial because if you're always from one location, if there's certain weather conditions prevail straight into you, you're in trouble for the day. So we will fish different parts of the island. We have a couple of primary spots that we put in, but we can vary that depending on the season. But we have probably about 4 or 5 that we can use, but we have 2 primary ones. So about 7:45, everything's loaded up. About 7:30, the lunches are all loaded in the coolers and the guides are fueled up and we pull into the parking lot. And then at 7:45, we head off to the flats. And depending on which ramp they use, can be anything from 10 minutes to 20 minutes on average. And then you're on the flats themselves once you launch, So you can either fish, all of the ramps that we use, you literally could go around the corner and start fishing. You're right on the flats. But depending on where the weather's coming from and where the light is, the usual sort of guide decisions, are made where to run to. So sometimes the guides might, depending on prevailing wind direction, they may say run. They may decide, I'm going to run 40 minutes in one go, and then I'm just going to work my way back. Or they may go around the corner 5 minutes and start fishing and go from there. So, where you go, each guide has their own preferences. And like I said, sometimes the weather sort of guides you into making your decisions. You're not going to go under. If it's a half an hour to get away from the clouds, you're going to make that half an hour run. For example,
okay.
You want to chase the sunlight.
Is it always, one client to one guide in one boat, or do you double up ever? Or?
No, mostly 2.
Oh, 2. Okay.
2 anglers per guide, but that we have packages for both. So you either share a room and share a guide, or you can share a guide but have your own rooms, or you can, just have your own private room and your own private guide. Obviously, private room, private guide is going to be more expensive for that individual, but
some people want it that way.
That's what they want. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it looks beautiful on your website. It really looks fantastic. I hope someday I can get down there and check it all out and fish with you.
You should. Well, you know where we are.
I do. Yeah, not far. Well, tell me, in all these years of fishing, do you have a most memorable fish? Maybe you already told me the story when you were a little kid and you got that strike from that little trout.
There's one story that popped straight into my head now, and it's pretty unique. This would be about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was training a guide, and we pulled up onto the flat, and we were having lunch. We just had the engine down that was caught on the bottom, and I'm halfway through a roast beef sandwich, and the guide goes, tarpon, tarpon, tarpon. So I jumped to my feet, actually grabbed my tarpon rod. He pulled up the engine and pulls off the flat a little bit, and I look up, and it's actually not like I said, I was training the guide, so it wasn't two tarpon, it was actually two big permit. So I put the tarpon rod, I picked up the permit rod and just managed to get one cast off and got fortunate, and the fly landed where it should have been, and the fish ate it. And this was my biggest permit of my career now. It was a big permit. So we fought the fish and we drifted off and started up the motor, started chasing the fish, and the fish took us all over the place. So about 15 minutes or so into the fight, the fish was getting tired. And so I explained to the guide, I gave him some instruction. Because this was his first permit. So I'm going to give you some instruction, gave him instruction on what to do, because I was up on the bow. This fish was too big for me to try and land it and hold on to the rod at the same time. So we had an in-depth discussion on what's going to happen, and then when it does happen, on what to do. So as I said to him, when I get this fish now, it's going to be on its side and I'm going to slide it. I said, don't reach for it, don't lunge or anything like that. I'm going to have it on its side. And then what I want you to do is to go down with one hand and grab what we call the wrist, right on the tail, which is that point that it starts to flare out for the quarter fin, for the tail itself. Think of it as a wrist, like you're grabbing somebody's wrist. Just grab it. But the most important thing is the moment you grab it, lift it out of the water. I said, it's going to thrash or whatever, but get that tail out of the water. You have to, because that's its motor right there.
Yeah.
So everything was fine. I got, on the first pass, in fact, the fish was up on its side and he waited. Fair play, did everything right, and he grabbed the wrist. Everything was perfect. But he did two things wrong at that moment. One was he grabbed the leader at the same time, which he was not supposed to do. But the most important thing was he didn't lift the tail out of the water. So the next thing I see, and the guide sitting, kneeling down in the well of the boat, the next thing I see is just the soles of his feet. It was split
Really?
second. This fish dragged him, pulled him clean out of the boat, right?
Really?
And he hit the water, and we drifted off the flat quite so. So it wasn't super deep, maybe 8 feet or so. Whitey marley bottom, white colored bottom. So there's at first there's just an explosion of foam and water and bubbles and then the fish took him straight down. And for the first few seconds, I couldn't see anything because it was just literally, it had been foamed. So there was all these bubbles, you couldn't see anything. Well, the next thing that happened was bump, up pops this ball cap. So the first sign of any activity was his ball cap coming to the surface. Then as the bubbles cleared, I looked down there, and at this point now he's got his second hand round the thing, round the fish, and that fish
he still got it.
Still got it. He's down he's near the bottom in about 8 feet of water, and he is just struggling with this fish. And then the fish, he has to let go, What I didn't realize was, it's just not I'm looking down at it and I'm going, this isn't a big problem. What I didn't realize is he grabbed the leader. So he'd actually broken the line as well at this point.
Oh, he did?
Yeah, by grabbing the leader. Because even if he'd let go of the fish, if I was still connected, it would have continued. But, and off he goes. So the fish is gone, and the guide comes up, and his eyes is just like saucers. It's just like, deer in the headlights. Like, what was that?
Yeah.
And he tried, and that was my career fish right there. That was the biggest permit that I hooked on a fly rod. And, I'm not particularly happy, but I understand, So as I get in the boat, come on, blah, 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 blah. And anyway, so he sort of pours himself back into the boat. And then I look up, and about 100 yards away, this permit now has come to the top. It's still running away, but it's come up on the surface. So I thought, you son of a gun. So I went to the console, fired it up, the engine, and I just screamed right over to where the permit was. Now, it was still on the top. It was swimming away, but its fins were out. So swimming. And I just went straight up. As I got to about 10 yards from it, 20 yards from it with the motor, it sounded, but it's a white sand bottom. So I could see everything. It wasn't particularly rough. And, that fish would go right, I would go right. It would go left, I would go left. And I basically, cut a long story short, for the sort of 300 or 400 yards or 200 or 300 yards left to the same island, the same shoreline, and literally probably only 50 to 75 yards away from where I hooked it, I herded that permit all the way into the shallows. Yeah. And then as we got closer and closer, the engine starts bumping on the bottom, shallower and shallower and shallower. So I said to the guide, right, I said, we've got just a few more feet before we have to sort of abandon ship. So you go left, I'll go right, and just keep herding it into the mangroves because it's getting shallower and shallower and shallower and shallower. So the guide went out left. His name's Devon. Guide went out left. I went out right. And we bottlenecked this fish then right into the shallows, and it got shallower and shallower, and it was bumping its belly on the flat, bump to bump, and then there was a small little mangrove, probably only about the size of a garbage can, and it swam straight into that mangrove, and it's almost like it just said, you know what, I've had enough, I give up, right? And then the guide went in, Devin went in, and this time he grabbed the tail and got the tail out of the water. So I have pictures of this fish, got my fly back and everything, So I got the fish in the end. It was unhooked. It had escaped for all intents and purposes till it just showed itself for that few seconds with a surf. I don't know what made me do it.
That's awesome.
But we got it back. We got the fish. I got pictures of it, and it's still to this day my largest. We put it on a 30-pound boga grip, and it just went flunk.
Yeah. What a great story. I would love it. Could you send us a picture of that? Maybe we could put that out.
Oh, God, yeah.
Okay.
You bet I got pictures of that one.
We'll post that. That'd be great.
I've got a whole pile of them. I'll send you pictures. It's a nice big one, but that's an interesting story. Never heard of that happening before. So
I have never heard of it. How big was it? I mean, is it pounds that you're weighing there, or how do you?
Well, yeah, it was a 30-pound boga rig, and went to the. I put it. I don't like to do it, but it was so bad. I put it on its lip, and I didn't mess around with it too much. But my guesstimation, it was because you've got like several bars below, or a bar and a half or so below the 30-pound marker, and I could make it bounce it a little bit. So I think it was probably somewhere in the 33, 34-pound range, I would say.
Really?
Somewhere in there.
That sounds like a monster. And so 33 pounds of permit is enough to yank you in the water. That's good to know.
It pulled him, and he's like 6 foot, something like that. It's not like he's a real small guy, probably, 200 pounds. It's not like he's a little waif of a guy, it's slim built and strong guy, but pulled him straight out. I'll never forget it. Just the soles of his feet. He wasn't wearing. That's all I saw.
Well, you thought you'd seen everything until you saw that, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So that's one story. When people ask for a fishing story, that is one that pops up pretty quickly.
That's a pretty good one. Well, good. So talk to me about some of your favorite fly patterns. I know that you're a tyer yourself. You've got some flies you've been selling commercially. But what are the top patterns, colors, sizes, and weights and whatnot? Yeah.
Well, Steve, here for our fishery, one of our most popular flies that's commercially available is, for example, the Puglisi spawning shrimp. Now, is the sort of popularity of that fly because of the pattern or because of how it's available? Well, while it's an exceptionally good fly, how it's available to be purchased also has an important factor in it for our fishery, because the tides here are significantly higher and lower than a lot of other places. So like in some months we may have a tide that's close to 4 feet, on a 6-hour turn, right? So we need, what's important for our fishery is not necessarily a whole huge, massive fly box full of flies. It's actually having different weight properties of those flies.
Okay.
So for us, for example, the number 4 Puglisi spawning shrimp, is available in a lead eye, and it's available in a bead eye, and then the number 6 actually is available in a small lead eye. So we get 3, different sink rates to that particular fly, and they're available. You can see what they are. So if assuming you've got that right, if you're a tyer, for example, the most popular eye for us is the 1 to 50th or 1 to 60th of an ounce lead eye, also sold as 5/32 of an inch. And then patterns go like the McKnight crimp is a good one. Like I said, the Peterson spawning shrimp is another good one that's very popular here. We don't use so much the gotchas. They will work on the light bottom, but like I said, our fishery is a lot more varied than most. So we also like to have some slightly different colors too, because we have a dark bottom. So, for example, if you took the McKnight crimp, you have the tan, which is a lighter color, and then you have we call the merkin, which is a sort of dark brown, tan, mottled sort of body onto it. It's like a half crab, half shrimp. And then the Puglisi has both, clear or white. It has tan, and it also has root beer, which is another, almost tan, almost olive-looking sort of color to it as well. So olive, light brown, tan, occasionally some white is the sort of more blander colors that we like here. So the spawning shrimp variety, like I said, Viverka's mantis shrimp, they all work, really well. Anything shrimpy or crabby will work. Like I said, having those weight options there is as important, if not more important than anything else. So we'd rather you have only 3 patterns with that variety of weight than we would, a whole box full of bead, which is quite often the case. Because if you're fishing, for example, let's say you've gone to Belize, Yucatan or that area of Mexico, and their flats and their tidal variation is very small there. So you don't need to have too much of a wide sort of weight variety. You could pretty much get away with bead for the whole process, So maybe patterns then might be more of a need there, different colors, different sizes. You generally don't need that variety in the weight is concerned. Like if you go over to the Miles of Abaco, for example, it's the same. It's amazing. We're not that far away from there, and their tide fluctuations are like 6 inches.
Yeah.
Where we're like 4 feet or 3.5 feet. It probably has something to do maybe with the feed and all that kind of stuff. Maybe why the fish become more mature. Those more mature, bigger fish come down this way. I don't know. But either way, it's a known fact that there's a huge tide difference, even though they were relatively close together. So having that variety in weights is important. And each guide, everyone has their own personal favorites, but those are some of the most commonly, used ones.
Okay.
And commonly available, I should say. We could go into some very specific, and then I have a couple of patterns that are sold, but you don't see them around quite so much at the moment. I don't think I've let that all lapse, to be perfectly honest with you, Steve. I need to look to see but the Bonefish Gaz is a very interesting fly. If you can find it, I can't remember where it's available now, but
Orvis, I think, sells it. I found it on
Orvis
the Orvis
does,
site.
Possibly.
Yeah.
I know the fly shop did at some point. I don't know if they do or don't. I'm not sure, but that's another good one for this fishery as well. It combines that the sink rate and lands quite softly, which is a great combination.
Yeah. Okay, one more question just to wrap things up.
Yeah.
Obviously, fishing is super important to you, and I'm curious, can you kind of summarize for us what has fishing meant to you in your life?
Oh, yes, an interesting question. About everything, pretty much, I would say,
Yeah.
I've been doing it as a professional almost all my working life, so I don't really know much outside of fishing. But while you sort of your interest in wanting to go every single day, like I probably did in my 20s and 30s, wanes a little bit. It's still a daily thought process for me. I don't think there's a day gone by, even when we don't have customers or clients, that I'm not thinking in some way just for a few moments about fishing, for example. I can't even walk to the computer each morning without walking past my vice. So, you're just constantly reminded. So it's a daily thing for me. Just about every single day. Yeah, it will pop into my head at some point.
Well, Greg, thanks for being on the show. I appreciate all your words of wisdom about Grand Bahama Island and tips on successful bone fishing. And I certainly hope people give you a call. And how can people get in touch with you and book a trip with you?
Yes, probably the easiest way, Steve, is to just go onto the website at www.h2obonefishing.com, and then there's email contacts, messaging contacts, telephone contacts, all available on the site there, which I will get instantly and will respond as soon as I possibly can, which is normally quite quickly.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Well, we'll post that to our show notes on our Destination Angler website, and we'll get some pictures of Greg's fly box and his favorite patterns out on our Facebook and Instagram pages. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Hey, be sure to give us a share, like, or follow on Instagram and Facebook, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Greg, I wish you extraordinary success in everything you're doing down there and all your adventures to follow. And folks, feel free to email me with comments or suggestions at shag50@gmail.com. And as always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.